Are you? Yeah, yeah. Hello. Hello. Hello, everyone. So welcome to our final conference for FAIR platform work. So I will not introduce longly so that we don't lose time. You know the program. Thank you for your presence here and welcome in Brussels for all those who travel to Brussels. Thank you for that. I'm Ludovic from the ETUC, and I'm happy that we have this final conference today. I will directly hand over for the introduction to our keynote speaker, Isabel Ferreras, who's with us, and I will hand over directly to her. Thank you.
Merci, Ludovic. Yeah, should I stay here? Okay. Hello, good morning. Bonjour. It's a great pleasure to be with you. I'll ask Ignacio's help to move the slides. So I've been asked to introduce your day of work. I'm very excited to hear all that you've been developing during these conversation between unions and platform workers. I think this is a really crucial area of development because basically platform work is becoming the new standard. So it's driving the whole labor market, so-called labor market. So it's an area of thinking for scholars, which is absolutely key. And I am going to focus my remarks on the Platform Work Directive, which is in the news, which has been in the news, which is in discussion. And I want to stress two critical challenges that the current version of the directive is addressing and highlight why this is so important. Why it's so important, it's because the directive is going to address what I think we should call the problem of the invisibility of the firm, or the disappearance of the firm, and the problem of the government of work. We can move to the next slide, please, Ignacio. So just as a framing point, I'd like to say that, as I just said, that platform work really is of crucial interest because it represents a radicalization of the challenges that we have faced, that workers have faced under capitalism, and that they are going to face even stronger, even worse. And this is part, what I'm discussing is part of joint work with Jeremiah Adams-Prassel, who's a legal scholar at Oxford University. So let me switch to the first problem, the problem of the invisibility of the firm. I'd like to ask you to think about this particular question. What do you think capital investors would do if he would be asked to buy some shares in a corporation, but that he would know that no person, no driver, no worker would actually deliver the service? What would you think would capital investors do? Well, it's a real question, but I guess the answer is obvious, right? No one would put any money into that. No one would buy a share. And here it's the Uber case, because Uber is such a popular case, but actually you can reason the same way for any platform firm. If Uber drivers would not be driving their cars, no capital investors would buy any shares in the corporation. It's absolutely obvious. Yet, this is the world in which we live. It's a world in which the problem, if we might define it that way, is what I call the reduction of the firm to the corporation. We actually totally forget the fact that, and we're going to move to the next slide, we forget that workers are actually the labor investors without whom there would be actually no service or no production. Without the labor investors, there is nothing happening. It's not because you have a pile of money that actually the service will be delivered. It's obvious, right? Yet we live in a world in which we forget that workers actually invest themselves into the work so that this work happens, this work takes place. And workers are actually, we need to move to the next slides, workers are governed. They are the ones who are governed by the rules and decisions of the corporation. But what's the corporation? It's the capital owners organized via a corporation. Workers do not have a say on that government. What is a corporation is the question I'd like to ask then, because this is very important to get our ideas straight in this area. What is a corporation? It's very simple, and it actually holds across countries, certainly across the EU. It's a legal concept. A corporation is a group of capital investors who inject some money and they get a certificate of incorporation, which is granted, which is certified by the state. By this, they are granted moral persona. They can become a persona being present in the courts. They are a legal entity, and it's run by a board of directors, which is empowered to mobilize the assets of the corporation. And they mobilize it by entering into contracts, commercial contracts, labor contracts. And this process is called in the legal scholarship as developing a firm, building the firm around the corporation. Next slide, please. But what we have built as a world is indeed a world in which legal entities are corporations. But they are actually a subset of what is the reality descriptively, even for a corporation to operate. And this we call the firm. The firm is this sociological concept. It's not a legal concept. And actually, if we want to understand what is a firm, you have to get to the point where you get that a firm is a political entity. It's a political entity which is actually institutionally structured, which combines various forms of rationalities, certainly the rationality of investors, financial investors who have this instrumental rationality. They want a return on investment, but actually workers have very different rationalities. They have expressive rationalities. They care for the service, they care for what they do in the world via their job. And the firm exists only because you have these two, the capitalist firm exists only because you have these two types of investments, the labor investments and the capital investments. And both engage in power relations, goal setting, and are affected in return of the action, the endeavor of the firm. Yet, workers are the only ones who are governed. Capital investors are not governed at all by the decisions of the firm. They are affected in their return on investment, but they are not governed. And so we face a situation in which the institutional, the legal structuring of capital investors have been very well thought, very secured by the state via the existence of the corporation, but workers do not have the same sets of rights. They do not wait on the government of their joint endeavor. So given this void in the history of capitalism, it has always been considered the basic standard to recognize the employment relationship as the default for giving workers more rights, that is the rights to really govern the joint endeavor. So the problem of the invisibility of the firm is addressed, I think, very correctly in the directive on platform work by the legal presumption of employment. Of course, we should legally presume that labor investors who invest their own person into delivering the service are employed by the platform we don't care. It's called a platform. It's actually a corporation, and it should be considered a firm. That's the first critical challenge addressed. Then the second one is the problem of the government of work. This is also a problem as old as capitalism. When you think about whatever workers, here we have the writers, but think about any worker. Workers are citizens. It means they are living in a context, and I'm certainly speaking the context of the EU, in a context in which they've been born to think of themselves as citizens. They should be able to be treated as equals in dignity and rights and validate the norms that apply to them. This is why we go to vote. Obviously, we consent to the government that applies to us. This is the core democratic ideal. Yet, when workers enter into the workplace, they are governed, indeed, but they cannot consent. And so it's a major contradiction with our democratic ideal. So if we speak about investment, and we generally hear a lot about, capital investment and how capitalists are taking risks, well, let's think about factually the fact that actually those who are actually taking the most intense risks are actually the labor investors. They are governed, as I said, by the rules and decisions of the firm, yet they do not have a say on that government. But, please, the next slide. But they are actually bearing the biggest risks because they are bearing the risk on their health. We've seen that in COVID, but physical health, mental health, and they are bearing risk vis-a-vis their own skills. Will their skill become more in tune with technological change, or will they have skills that in 10 years from now will have no value at all? Will they be able to flourish in the future as a human person into their work or not? All these decisions are actually in the hands of the corporation, of capitalist investors, and they are risks borne by the labor investors. And I just want to keep this as a note that capital investors, we should never forget, they are pretty well protected from risks. And this is called limited liability. The risks that a Uber or someone who owns a share in the corporation, actually, the risk that person bears is only to see the value of the share go to the ground, to zero. It's unfortunate. No one is happy when that happens, I guess, but it's not like your own person being invested in your work and being running the risk of death. We've seen that very clearly during COVID time, but with your mental health and all the risks that I stated. So the problem of the government of work is addressed also in the current project of directives by basically recognizing that workers indeed should have the right to understand the types of government that apply to them and should have the right to challenge these rules and decisions. And this is taken in seriously consideration by the algorithmic management rights. This is a key area of development because it's heading into the right direction. What's the right direction? We believe, and we've been a network of more than 6,000 researchers since COVID getting organized through what we have called democratizing work as a global network, basically identifying what should be the threshold for workers in the world today. The threshold is for them to have the ability to validate or veto the decisions of the firm, because they are the ones who are subjected to that government. They are the ones who are running the risks, and there are no valid reasons to prevent them to bear on the government of the firm. So I've been already long enough, so let me finish by saying that this directive and all the work around platform work. And I believe that the work that you as unions, as representatives of workers have been doing for the past decade to get the people's attention, the media's attention, the elected officials' attention on this crucial area of legislation is absolutely central. Because it's not only that basically offering a response to those two critical challenges is key. It's that it's really identifying the direction for the future. And if we want, this is part of what we've been discussing and researching as researcher in this democratizing work network, if we want a future that is both democratic and sustainable, we really need to seek ways to sustain the three principles that are behind the version of responses that are in the current directive. It's democratizing the firm, decommodifying labor, so that we can decarbonize the planet. And today we know this is the crucial decade. So thank you very much for your leadership, and thank you for your listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabelle. So we will turn off the beamer and put some seats for the next panel, and stop the sharing of the PowerPoint. So swiftly organizing the transition to the next panel. I can already invite Kim van Sparentak, who's a MEP of the Greens, who was a shadow rapporteur, and he's still in the process on the directive on the platform work. You can, if you want to join. I will invite also Olivia Spera from the European Transport Federation, and Oliver Rötig from Uni Europa, the service trade union. Yeah, you can. Yeah, you can. There will be nothing in the background. Perfect. So I can start. So thanks, Isabelle, for introducing the challenge that you identify behind the development of platform work. Clearly, the issue of democratization of work is at the center of the discussion. There's no democracy at work for the moment for most workers in platform companies, and that's an issue that we will discuss throughout the day. You have seen the program. Throughout the day, we will navigate between Europe, what's happening in Europe with the EU directive, what's happening in your member states with the developments there, what you have also put in place as trade unions in order to try to involve and represent workers in platforms. What's the strategies? We will go through not only the difference at member states level, but also at sectoral level, also already in this panel, but there are really different sectors that are involved by the development of platform work, people that are visible in the streets and people that are completely invisible and that are behind a computer or an application. So it's also important that we have a knowledge and an overview of the challenge in platform work and how to address the issue. And we will try to have this throughout the day with a lot of participation from your side. So thank you also for this. So I would briefly introduce by saying that I think where we are now with a proposal of directive on the table, which has to be negotiated by the Council and the Parliament. The Parliament has a mandate, the Council has no mandate, so nothing is happening for the moment. We are waiting. So there's a need to advance, but we are in a situation where there's a proposal on the table, but it cannot be implemented for the moment. The situation in which we are, it's important to recognize that it's also the fruit of all your work at national level. It's the fruit of the work of trade unions to have, in the evolution of platform work, try to organize people, to involve them in collective bargaining in platform work, put political pressure on policymakers, put litigation strategies in place that have been widely seen all over Europe and widely successful, and put also communication strategies in order to see, to show the invisible side of work, to show this to the public opinion. And all these strategies that trade unions have put in place led to the situation in which we are. 3 years ago, it was unthinkable, I think, to think that we would have a directive on platform work with a presumption of employment relationship on the table. That's trade unions and their allies that have set this agenda. It's important to say. And if it's so under strong attack by member states and by the lobby of the platforms, it's also because it might be an effective tool. So that's something that is important to recognize. So it's both the result of the organization of workers and their trade unions and the pressure of our political allies in this regard, but it's also the situation in which we are now, the failure of governments to address the situation. So it's widely recognized since years that there's subordination in the most visible labor platform, but there's few countries where we can say that something has happened. So we are in a situation where there's a failure of government to address this, and the high pressure from employers' organizations, platform companies to avoid any responsibility. So the situation in which we are is contradictory. So it's a little bit of paradox. We have something on the table with strong pressure by member states, by a lot of member states not wanting to apply this, and we have set the agenda, but we still have no concrete result except in some countries, in some sectors, and that's the challenge that we are seeing today. So that's all from for my introduction. I will directly go to the discussion. I will start with first the trade unionists in the panel. So Livia is from the European Transport Federation, so representing more than 5 million workers of the transport sector. And I would like to ask you, Livia, regarding the development of platform work, what is the situation in your sector and the challenge that you identify?
Thank you, Ludo, and good morning, everyone. It's working. So possibly, I don't think I will tell you anything new today, because I think we're all working on this, and probably most of you more than me. But I would like to put a few points for reflection on the table. First of all, transport is possibly one of the most affected sectors, one of the sectors where it started earlier. In transport, our unions are mainly representing in platform ride hailing and food delivery. But what is more important for us is the domino effect. So some sectors such as last mile delivery, parcel delivery, logistics, and so are very similar for the way they function with food delivery, for instance. So it has been very important for our members to act on this, because and to try to include these new workers in the framework of the existing rules and of the existing collective bargaining agreements, exactly because there was a risk to make the sector special. What we always say, platform is not a sector, platform is a business model. So the rules that have to govern this are the rules of the transport sector. It has been said already this morning, these platform workers are often at the margin of the labor market. So we had a lot of cases of gang masters, for instance, of illegal forms of working, of people working under illegal or unexisting contracts. We have read, we are aware of this. It has made it to the papers everywhere in Europe, and I think yes, these workers are invisible, but I think it is our merit, and we should say it loudly, if they have been taken out of the hidden place where they were. But the situation is also very diverse. We have food delivery, workers working in food delivery. We also have workers in ride hailing. It's quite different group of people that work there. It's quite different salaries that they have. It's quite different motivation that they have to work in this sector. So our strategy should also be a little bit differentiated accordingly. What is common to them is the lack of rights and the lack of access to social security and so on. And that's why we should try to unite these workers that are extremely diverse from each other. Main issue, of course, in transport is health and safety. I was reading yesterday about some of our Italian members that have that are staging a demonstration, and the slogan is "We can't die to deliver a pizza," because there have been so many food delivery riders that have died because of that serious accident. They've been injured, lost their legs, and so on. And of course, this is also because the job is dangerous, but it's also because they're under pressure because of this algorithm management that was mentioned earlier. So this is where also our members have been prioritizing their work. So we are working together with our members already for a few years. I think that there are different levels of action. First of all, at local level, being present, unions have been, our unions have been also replacing in a way the companies, because they have been opening hubs, they have been opening centers where in several countries where the workers can go and meet and talk and have some warm drinks. So basically this should be in a way the job of the company, and we have been replacing them. At national level, we had, there is still a lot of work to do, but we also had some successes. So there have been some good pieces of legislation that have been adopted. If we think, for instance, in Spain about the rider law, and at European level, of course, the platform directive that Ludo explained earlier. One particular, I think one very important piece of work that was done was about litigation and triggering court cases. It was fundamental, but I think now it's enough. We can't go on like this. We need legal certainty. We can't go on for the reason we know in courts. And then I think the last point I wanted to make is about collective bargaining. And I will be very open to you I think our job there should be to normalize industrial relations. These companies should not consider themselves as special. They are companies and they have to be forced or be convinced to engage in industrial relations, immature industrial relations. The difficulty is that in some cases they don't even have industrial relations department and they send their lawyers. So that's very emblematic, I think. We have one case that is extremely controversial in the ETF. You have heard about it. I know that people from our Belgian unions are here represented, and I'm not taking position. I'm just explaining you the situation. Our international federation has signed a kind of a protocol with Uber, and it's about trying to promote dialogue at national level regarding so between ITF unions and the company. It's an extremely controversial agreement. We do not have a position as the ETF, so I'm not expressing any position. But what I wanted to put on the table is that within the unions, we should have this kind of discussion. So these companies, how are we going to approach these companies? We are not going to be able to sign a collective bargaining agreement directly with them. We are not going to be able, because they do not recognize themselves as employers. But maybe we are able to get through the back door and to try to bring some democracy at work. So it's a debate. Again, I'm not taking position, but it's a debate that we should be able to have. How do we do this? Are they, are other companies with which we negotiate better than Uber, or was there Uber? That I don't know. So I think we should really, we are starting this debate within our federation. How are we going to approach a company that is not available to behave as a normal company? There may be different ways of doing this, not uncontroversial, but I think it's worth discussing this within our movement.
Thank you, Livia, also for touching difficult discussions, which is important for us also to address together. I go now to Oliver to have a snapshot on what's happening in the service sector in platform work. So Europa is representing more than 7 million workers all over Europe. So it's also highly, the development of platform work is also highly prevalent in your sector, and maybe more unknown than in the transport sector. So maybe over to you.
Thank you very much. And first of all, perhaps on collective bargaining, which is key. We have now the work on the platform directive, which is very important. But let's be very frank. I mean, employers and governments listen when workers are organized. So we don't get around the point. If we have collective bargaining power, things will become easier, because then they can't really evade and use lobbying techniques or others to actually deny workers their rights. And then many people, many workers say, oh, this is very difficult in those hostile environment we are in. And then just remember, 150 years, when trade unions were first founded, governments didn't recognize them at all, sent them to prison and shot at them. It still exists in many countries around the world, but there it managed. And it was trade unions, because workers are coming together and basically simply said, we had enough, and we are strong, we are numbers, and we make a difference. And it took 50, 60 years to get the first result, but it worked. So in that sense, I think we should look at ourselves as well. How can we really work together, create collective power? Because that is really what makes a difference in society, in governments. And look now, you can see how pissed off workers are when you look at the strikes in France, in Great Britain, in Germany, in other countries. So there is really a point where there is a feeling among the population, not only among workers, that something is going wrong in our societies here in Europe, and we need to change it. And we can use this as trade unions and really as citizens as well. But now really coming to the questions. Europa is a services union, so we are all across the private services in the first place, and there, of course, platforms are sneaking in many different places. I mean, IT is, of course, one, or back office is where stuff is outsourced to a platform arrangement. But what I want to talk about today is platforms in the commerce sector, so that is in retail, and in care, or more particular, care at the home. When we talk first on the commerce sector, we have seen the emergence, and you might have heard about Gorillas, for instance, where companies popped up who basically said, we don't need supermarkets. You as a customer don't have to go to a supermarket. We deliver ourselves. And so they started, especially during the COVID crisis, to set up small warehouses in the neighborhood from which they wanted or deliver their goods at home, with a promise in some cases in 15 minutes and in 30 minutes. That is one model, and it doesn't seem to work because they burn a lot of money and then they merge, respectively go bankrupt. So I think that is not the model for the future, but of course it is there, and there is a demand. And when we look back in time, supermarkets always delivered home. It was a bit expensive and not many people were doing it, but it was there. And now what supermarkets are thinking about, well, we take the platform model of Gorillas and others and integrate this into our model, which is also perhaps good. You're going with the time, but it means you probably will have less workers in a supermarket. A good point of this part of the sector work is because you want to deliver in 15, 30 minutes or so, you actually have to be sure that workers are around. So there is a trend now that they actually have an employment contract. However, the problem is companies, of course, need to make money, and especially when you're under financial pressure. So they try to evade their obligations as a worker, as we have seen in Uber and everywhere else. It's basically a point of making work more precarious and shifting responsibility to the worker rather to keeping it with, Isabel was mentioning, with the capitalists who basically should actually do the risk, because for this they get the profit. So that is happening here. We will next Tuesday present an in-depth study of those Q-commerce or dark stores, where we actually really look at it. What does a model mean, and how do we actually react as trade unions? The other point is in the care sector, and that is home care sector. And probably most of us, especially those who are younger, are not really aware of it. We have a crisis in Europe throughout, that there are many families whose parents, they want to basically keep in their home, and they need basically caretakers for them. This starts from just cleaning to really having 24-hour care. And this is expensive, and you don't really find a lot of people. I was last week in Austria, and Austria has an additional problem that you have labor shortages. So you don't find really caretakers in the company, certainly. So what is happening? There is almost a mafia kind operation starting where workers from Ukraine, from Hungary, from Slovakia, from Czech Republic, they are basically shifted in for 2 weeks or something like that, having 24-hour care in a home, paid by the workers through platform with conditions which are absolutely not clear. And with the conditions often absolutely not clear. So we have to see how we get into this situation. And more so, those people are normally working in a family house by themselves. Sometimes with only one person they have to care about. Health and safety conditions. Nobody is really making sure what is there. Lifting a heavy person, what else is there. Employment contracts are unclear, and as we have in all of the platform sectors, collective bargaining, social dialogue is trade union representation is also very weak. And even worse so, if you're coming from another country, work in a family, potentially with one person, never see somebody else, how can we as trade unions or you actually go about it and get a collective together? That said, you can do this, of course, as well if you use social media. So we have two very different points. One is basically an extension of a market practice delivering goods, which links, of course, with what Livia is doing as well, and something which is totally different, really in the more than invisible area. We don't really see that those people are there. And I think we need a platform directive for this. We need rules for this. And what is really important, we need to have enforcement. Because, I mean, it's all very nice if we get the platform directive. But I mean, if there is no enforcement, then we have a problem anyway, because they continue as before. And then, Kim, really also paying attention to those who you can't even find. I mean, if you have Gorilla or so, I mean, you can find them at least. But what do you do if it is your mother who has somebody at home? She is officially the employer, and then is basically misused by some platforms who arrange it. And quite frankly, screw the workers as much as they can, and probably your mother as well, because they will provide a bad service. And if something happens, nobody is responsible. Thank you.
Thank you, Oliver. And so it leads me then to ask then the question to Kim van Sparentak, who's MEP for the Greens in the European Parliament, and following since the beginning the Platform Work Directive, and a strong ally of the trade union in this regard, in imposing also a good mandate for the European Parliament on the Platform Work Directive. We've seen here that we have different sectors that are affected, and often sectors where their traditional employees will be more and more affected with new models. There's also, of course, other sectors than those who we heard just about. So, of course, our Federation of Food, Agriculture and Tourism is also concerned, and other federations will also, in the long term, be concerned by the evolution of platform work. Also, of course, genuine self-employed traditional work or regulated professions, regulated professions might also be those that will in the future be completely subordinate by platform, if they are not already subordinate by clients. So that's, I think, an element to take into account. In this regard, how and what led, maybe you can explain what you have in the position in the Parliament, and how you think then this will answer to the trade union concerns in the development on platform work, and also how are you preparing for the trilogues negotiation? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. Hello, hello. I don't know. They all sound here. They all sound the same, I think. Hi everyone, and yeah, I think thanks so much for the invitation. I think it's really important that we keep discussing this topic, especially because indeed, you know, we've all seen you know, what has happened in the past decade when it comes to platform work. We now have some massive companies that have been established all over the world, and it's almost impossible now to do something about them because they have just become so big. And I think I'm not saying something weird if I say that we have collectively, like trade unions, policymakers, governments, collectively underestimated how fast and how massively they would transform the work environment, and to what extent, like how much money they had to burn, basically, because the amount of capital power that is behind these companies is just so incredibly big. So maybe to give you a bit more of an overview again, and where are we at in both the European Parliament and in the Council. So in the European Parliament, we have adopted our position at the end of last year, or at the beginning of this year, sorry. And it's I think we can be very happy with it. It was a really tough negotiation. The influence of these platforms was really big. Their lobby strategy is one you should really try to figure out how they did it and take note of, because it worked very well. Of course, they have a lot of money, they have a lot of influence, they have a lot of people that can influence, a lot of people who are very close to people within the parliament. So they really managed to put their foot between the door. There's even a story of a Deliveroo lobbyist waiting in front of the room where the EPP, so the conservative group, would discuss the last point of negotiation, telling them to go get them. So that's the extent of lobby that we had to deal with in the parliament. But of course, we came from the position of the European Commission, and you know, like the aims and objectives of the European Commission's proposal, we were already happy with. We had written the own initiative report in the European Parliament saying, okay, we want a rebuttal of the presumption of employment, making sure that you know, it's up to the platforms to prove that the people are actually genuinely self-employed, and not having that burden of proof upon the worker anymore. And the other part is, of course, the algorithmic management point, which is absolutely another crucial part, as I think also very well explained in your keynote. Thank you very much. And then when we started looking at it's quite obvious if you look at the Commission proposal, there are some loopholes in there. You know, it was a way to still accommodate these platform companies by saying, okay, the worker still would have to provide proof through going through a checklist that they were to some extent a worker, and that's why we have really gone quite radical, I would say, in our initial proposal as Greens, to just say, okay, there's zero obligation for the worker, and it's all up to the platform. And I think we found a way in the end, in the current position where we're at, that that's still the case. It is a bit less strong as we would have hoped, because we also wanted to have to ensure that that all the criteria that were in the proposal that had to be proven by the worker now had to be proven on a European level with European standards by the companies. That's unfortunately that was part of the deal that we couldn't keep in. But we did manage to fully make sure that the reversal of the burden of proof now lies with the companies. So we're really happy with that. Then the second part is, of course, the algorithmic management chapter. And what the Commission proposed was okay. I think we were already very happy that the European Commission didn't just refer to the General Data Protection Regulation, the GDPR, which for the longest time they had. No, the GDPR deals with personal data. Under the GDPR, workers are protected. And of course, to some extent they are. But the basis of the GDPR is consent. And the discussion of whether you can give consent when you are a worker, I mean, to me, it's quite clear. Like, you want to work, so you have to give consent for them to use your data. So in that regard, it doesn't make sense to say the GDPR applies also in the work environment in that way. So on the algorithmic management chapter, I think we've made massive improvements. We're really happy with it. It was also, interestingly, not the biggest point of discussion. It was, I mean, we had to negotiate, but it wasn't as contentious as the presumption of employment. And I think we can be really happy that we also really looked at for example, biometric surveillance, monitoring, being allowed to go look at other apps in your phone, all these things, and also to make sure that there would be more, more collective agreement kind of style negotiations when it comes to algorithmic management, and that workers would have a say in the way that the algorithmic management will take shape in these companies. So I think that's really amazing, really unprecedented, and I think that's where we really can be really happy. When it comes to the position where we're now, this is now where we stand in the European Parliament, and we are now waiting for the Council to get to their position. It seems it's really tough. There are some countries like for example Spain, who already have a riders law, that are really pushing for a stronger directive compared to what the Commission proposed. And we have, of course, the countries like France, who are really trying to just make it not applicable as much as possible. So that makes it really hard. And also the things we've heard from the Council seem that they're really far apart. And I think actually under the Czech presidency, they tried really hard to find a compromise. Unfortunately, they didn't find it. And one of the reasons is, of course, also that unfortunately Germany is not at the negotiation table. The Liberals have put a veto on it. So for now, they're on an abstention and they don't negotiate. So there's a lot of if there are German trade unions in the room, please put more pressure on your German government, because it's absolutely crucial they go back on the table, because their position is good. They're just not talking right now. And when it comes to what is happening in the Council right now, like yesterday, there was a leak of the current proposal of the Swedish presidency. It's not good. That's very clear. They're really going even further away from the Parliament's position. They're watering it down, and it would basically mean the reversal of the burden of proof wouldn't be there, or not, as much as we want. There would be some reversal, so not really. Very little things to say for trade unions, hardly anything. Very little rights for workers. So this is also a plea from my side. Please go back to your member states and make sure that they go into the right direction. Because if it stays like this and there will be a deal like this, then that's absolutely terrible. But also we just need to make more progress, because also if it stays like this, then it might take even longer before we actually have a directive in Europe. So that's when it comes to the proposal, that's where we stand right now. I think another very important part, and that's why I'm also really excited to be here today, because indeed, we're not only talking about these companies right now, right? We see that platform work, or the way that platform work is designed, is now becoming more common. I think you explained it very well. The Netherlands has a very big platform like Helpling. I think that's spreading. But also during the COVID times, the people who did the security and the Corona app checks, they were all, working through these kind of platforms. So I think it's really, really important that we continue doing it. But indeed, the key thing is they do have this contract. So they are not clearly falling under the Platform Workers Directive. They are employees, but they are, like mismanaged by an algorithm. And that's why one of the key things that I am working on right now is trying to make sure that for the next Commission, having an algorithmic management directive will be the key point. So really looking at what we have in the Platform Work Directive on algorithmic management, we try to have that applicable for all workers. We knew that would be a bit of a stretch, and we didn't keep it in, although it took quite long before it came out in the deal in the end, but unfortunately it came out. But really to make sure that that we have a proper algorithmic management directive, probably part of also occupational health and safety framework in the EU, and to make sure that, you know, all this platform workification, or however you want to call it, in the labor market will also be tackled through an algorithmic management directive. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for this overview of the challenge now in the negotiations and the ongoing discussion in the Parliament and with the Council. I think this gives a good overview. Maybe I can have a last question to all the speakers with really small interventions. But I think you already mentioned a little bit the answer, but if you can develop for you the main challenge in granting good working conditions for platform work. Of course, you've said that the directive should not be only about litigation, but about enforcement. So it's clear that it's one of the issues. Normalizing our industrial relations and organizing collective bargaining, it's clear it's one of the issues. But if you want to pick one other or pick one of these and develop a little bit our strategies, because indeed we don't want to speak up only about legislation. We are also speaking here about trade union power and building trade union power in these companies and the workers' response. So Olivia, I know you have to go soon, so we start with you.
Yeah, so I think misclassification doesn't work. It works. Misclassification and ending bogus of employment are the priorities for us. There are already some platform companies that are employing, that are actually having workers. They're having their employees, and so we need to also establish a level playing field to make sure that those who are acting according to the law are not punished. We are quite happy with the compromise of the Parliament, and we know that there are challenges in the Council. We have still a very strong doubt on the recital on the taxi dispatching centers, because we know that it can open a loophole, and we risk to not to include some companies like Uber and the like, for which the directive was designed. So there are still some concerns there, but we are, of course, working closely with our national members to try to push, as you said, their national governments. But as Ludo said, there is an ongoing work that is being done by our members. Together with us, we are sharing a lot of information. This is very important because in some countries there have been some successes that need to be shared, that can inspire also other unions to be a little bit creative, because the situation is quite unusual. We are at the moment, for instance, I think tomorrow we will have a meeting together with EFAT, with our affiliates, to start the process for having an EWC for Just Eat Takeaway. So that's yet another way to push for democracy at work at European level. But especially our members are trying to negotiate to adapt their collective bargaining strategy. It's not just about pay, but many of our members are really working internally to try, for instance, to include negotiations about the use of the algorithm, because we're very happy to hear that you're looking at the last mandates to push for a proposal on the directive on algorithm management. But in the meantime, I think it's our duty as trade unions also to include these new elements into collective bargaining. And as Oliver said, it remains a clear priority. Really sorry, but I need to go and take a plane, so I'll leave you here now.
Perfect.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. You can give the micro to Oliver. Thank you, Olivia.
Thank you, Livia. And I think I could repeat everything Livia has said, so that's a bit boring. So perhaps some other points. I mean, first of all, a worker is a worker is a worker. And when I look at the platform workers directive, platform workers as such don't really exist. I mean, in the first chapter is about more or less bogus self-employed, everything related to it, which applies to platform workers, but it applies in many sectors and services definitely as well. So it's nothing really special. And the same as Kim said already with algorithmic management. I mean, almost everybody will be affected by this today. So the problem I see in this regard So we have very often a platform worker sitting together, working side by side with someone who has a normal contract. So one has rights, the other one doesn't have rights. How do you actually want to resolve this within the companies? So the question is really, how do you solve a problem if you have a platform worker and a normal standard worker sitting side by side, and you have two different kind of regulation for this? So that will be a problem we will have to address in one way or another. And now on a more positive note, going back to the care sector in Austria. So our union there came up with the idea to have something like a counter platform. They created a matching platform where basically the care providers, so individuals who wanted to work in a family in a home, can be basically matched with families who need a carer. So that's good. And the other thing is, for the members of this trade union, they basically set up not a platform, but an internet platform where you basically can get information and advice. What do you do in a situation if you have to take care of your mother? And not only that, they did this for father as well, or whomever else in the family. They did this not only for the members, but they are now opening this up and going to employers and saying, look, if you have an employee who is stressed out because they can't find a carer, here you have a platform, there we can help you with advice. So it's basically extending social dialogue and getting a positive reply from employers and some money, because it costs money, doing something for the members who look for a carer, and setting up a trade union structure where actually workers in care can get together. So that's really one way where you can really use it and get to collective bargaining and a better self-organization and collective for the sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Oliver. Kim, do you want to react or elaborate on other things?
No, I think that's really exciting that you're working on that. I think that's really cool. Send me the info. Because I think indeed, one of the biggest challenges we have is how do we counter these massive platforms that already have taken over, right? We have great initiatives, cooperatives, and in other kinds of initiatives, but these platforms are just so big. So how do we counter them? And I think it's great that a trusted source such as the trade union is organizing such a thing to counter what is happening. I think when we look at the future, I think, to some extent, we really can be positive. I think we're all aware now. That's a good start. There's a lot of research going on. And I think we will never be fooled again like we have by platforms such as Uber. I think we can be very optimistic when it comes to the algorithmic management, how we're going to deal with that in the future. Also the awareness of the people working in these environments and realizing like the way that I'm being treated by an algorithm, that's not the way it should be. The need for interpersonal contact is just necessary. So I think we're at a moment in time where we can be very positive. But the thing is still that in governments, unfortunately, there's still a lot of conservative powers who are still thinking that the sharing economy, they still call it the sharing economy in certain governments. I mean, like, I think we got over that, but in certain governments, that's still the thing, the sharing economy, which is something positive, la la la. Not true. I think that's where we now have to put the pressure. But I think in general, we can be very optimistic, and collectively we can really make sure that, I think platform workers, when you said, indeed, like, to distinguish them, platform workers should be the same as a metal worker. It's just someone who works on a platform, but they also have rights, and it's just a category of a worker. It's not something special. And I think that's what we have to aim for. Thank you.
Thank you. And so to conclude, indeed, maybe the sharing economy became the shareholder economy because, it's about optimizing profit without paying workers and decent working pay. I think we have identified most of the issues around the discussion in platform work that we will also elaborate on in the different panels that we have today, but I would only quote some of them. So the directive should not be about litigation, but about enforcement. This is a clear challenge that with the Commission proposal and the Council discussion, this demand is not much for the moment. It's not clear that the directive would make a change if we depend on the proposal that is on the table at the moment, because there would still be a need for the litigation, unfortunately, in the current text of the Commission and of the Council. It's also a question of normalizing industrial relation and organizing collective bargaining, really being able as trade unions to organize workers to then represent their voice and impose the conditions, the terms and conditions to the platform companies. It's also about not only looking at platform workers with a narrowed definition of digital labor platform, because it's also one of the weakness, of course, of the proposal on the table, is that some of workers outside of the narrow definition of digital labor platform are exactly in the same situation of subordination, but only with clients or with companies that have strategies in order to subordinate them, but where workers don't go to court themselves because they have no confidence that this will work individually. So it should not be about individuals going to court. So I think with the next panels, so after the break, we will have the presentation of the project country reports that we have discussed with most of you, with 10 country reports that have been prepared. We will have a debate on the invisible workers in digital labor platform. I think it's an important debate and panel to show the diversity of the situations that we have in front of us. And then we will have also a debate on will the directive will make a change with focus on the national developments for the moment in the last years. So what we learn from these development at national level in order to have a directive that can make a change. And then we will have the conclusions also with another MEP coming, and also someone from the cabinet of Commissioner Schmidt. So this last session will again be live streamed. This one was also live streamed. Maybe I didn't say that at the beginning, but if you want, the last session will also be live streamed. So if you want to share it on Twitter, it's shared on the Twitter of the ETUC. So at 3:50 we will have again a live stream on the Twitter of ETUC. So we go to a break now for 15 minutes, so meaning we can start again at 11:25. Thanks, Kim, and thanks, Oliver, for your contributions.